20% of the world's oil, 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, one waterway, 2 miles wide at its narrowest point. And right now, it is effectively closed. Here's what makes no sense. The United States has the most powerful navy on the planet. NATO exists. The UN Security Council meets in emergency session. And yet, as of today, vessel traffic through the Strait of Hormuz sits at roughly 5% of what it was just 2 months ago. 5%. Not because the infrastructure is broken. Not because of a natural disaster. Because one country decided to turn the world's most critical energy choke point into a weapon. And the world's most powerful nations are watching. This video exists because not enough people are connecting the dots on what this actually means for you, your economy, and the next 12 months. That changes today. Now, before we go further, one number that almost nobody is talking about, 25%. That is the share of the global economy that Iranian officials themselves claim is directly impacted by their control of Hormuz and the Bab al-Mandab Strait combined. Iran Deputy Parliament Speaker Aline 20th. Not a Western estimate, not a think tank projection. Iran said this out loud, and then said the strait will, quote, under no circumstances return to its previous state. That statement should be the headline of every financial newspaper on Earth. It is not. So we are going to treat it with the seriousness it deserves. Let us start with what almost nobody shows you. Not the military strikes, not the missile counts, the shipping data. Before February 28, 2026, approximately 3,000 vessels used the Strait of Hormuz every single month. 3,000. Today, that number sits at roughly 150. That collapse did not happen because ships are afraid of headlines. It happened because insurance companies stopped covering vessels attempting the route. Because drone threats are real. Because Iran has already seized 2 cargo vessels in April alone. And because the math stopped making sense for shipping companies the moment the risk became unquantifiable. Think about what that means for one moment. When cargo stops moving, prices start moving in the opposite direction. Global oil and gas prices have already risen since the conflict began. Russia is benefiting directly. Higher oil prices fill Moscow's war chest while they contribute nothing to the solution. This is the part of the story that the cable news debate about missiles and diplomacy completely misses. The economic blast radius of a closed Hormuz is not contained to the Middle East. It reaches your fuel pump, your grocery bill, your mortgage rate within weeks, not years. If that matters to you, share this video right now with someone who needs to understand what is actually happening, not the simplified version, the real one. Now, here is the question everyone is dancing around but not answering directly. Why is nobody stopping this? The answer is more uncomfortable than most analysts want to say out loud. The United States is currently maintaining a naval blockade of Iranian ports. 38 ships turned back or redirected as of late April 2026. U.S. forces have boarded tankers linked to Iran's shadow fleet as far out as the Indian Ocean. So there is enormous military presence in the region. But here is the problem. Military presence and military solution are two completely different things. Reopening a strait by force means entering Iranian and Omani territorial waters. It means potential confrontation with a country that has already launched hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles at U.S. military bases across Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE simultaneously. It means a conflict that is already regional becoming something much larger. NATO allies have declined to contribute forces during active hostilities. China, Japan, and South Korea, all of whom depend heavily on Hormuz for their own energy supply, have also declined Trump's request for support. Some of them, including China, have quietly come to separate diplomatic arrangements with Iran to keep their own ships moving. So the coalition that would be needed to force the strait open does not exist. And Iran knows it. Stop here for a second, because this is the part most people miss entirely. Iran entered this conflict from a position of significant weakness, extensive domestic protests in early 2026, a collapsed economy, regional proxies severely degraded by years of Israeli military action. By most military assessments, this was Iran at its most vulnerable in decades, and yet they closed the most important waterway on Earth and are holding it closed. That is not the move of a desperate regime. That is the move of a regime that calculated correctly that the economic cost of forcing it open is higher than the political cost of leaving it closed, at least for now. Here is a fact that will reframe everything you just heard. The Strait of Hormuz is not fully in Iranian waters. The navigable shipping channel passes through both Iranian and Omani territorial waters. Oman has historically been a mediator in U.S.-Iran tensions. Quiet, diplomatic, non-confrontational. The same Omani foreign minister who was mediating nuclear talks in February 2026, just weeks before the strikes began. Any solution that does not involve Oman is not a complete solution, and yet Oman is barely mentioned in most Western coverage of this crisis. Here's your second number that almost nobody is reporting. In March 2026, the United States temporarily removed sanctions on some Russian oil and Iranian oil already in transit, specifically to try to lower global oil prices. The United States, in the middle of a military conflict with Iran, temporarily lifted some Iranian oil sanctions to manage the economic fallout of its own operation. That is not a sign of a clean, decisive strategy. That is a sign of how tangled this situation has already become. Subscribe to Hormuz Report right now, because the next phase of this conflict, the talks, the Hormuz deal, the nuclear question, is going to move fast. And you need a source that explains it without the noise. Now let's close every open loop. At the start of this video, there was a contradiction sitting in plain sight. The world's most powerful military alliance and a closed strait, both true at the same time. Now you understand why that contradiction exists and why it is not going to resolve itself quickly or cleanly. Here is the single strongest insight we have been building toward. The Strait of Hormuz was never just a shipping lane. It was always a political instrument waiting to be activated. Iran activated it. And in doing so, exposed something the global energy system has known for decades, but never wanted to say clearly, that 20% of the world's oil supply passes through a gap 2 miles wide inside the territorial waters of a country that the West has been in conflict with for 47 years. That is not a supply chain. That is a single point of failure for the global economy dressed up as normal trade infrastructure. The conditional ceasefire declared on April 8th has not reopened the strait. Talks mediated by Pakistan are ongoing. Iran's new leadership, Khamenei's son, appointed under the most volatile conditions imaginable, has stated the strait's status is non-negotiable. CNN. The U.S. blockade continues. 38 ships turned back. The Indian Ocean boarding operations continue, and global shipping has not returned. 3 things you now know that most people watching the news do not. First, the Hormuz closure is not a temporary pressure tactic. Iran has explicitly said it will not return to its previous state. That means any resolution requires a structural agreement, not just a ceasefire. Second, the economic impact is already global, already real, and already benefiting actors like Russia who played no role in the conflict and bear none of its costs. Third, the coalition capable of forcing the strait open does not currently exist, which means diplomacy is not the backup plan, it is the only plan. One final thought to leave with you. The world just learned that a country with a severely weakened economy, degraded military alliances, and internal protests can still hold 25% of the global economy hostage using 2 miles of water and the political will to use it. That lesson will not be forgotten, not by Iran's successors, not by every other nation watching how this ends, and not by the global energy market that just discovered how fragile its most basic assumptions really are. The strait is closed, the talks are uncertain, the clock is running. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because this story is not slowing down, and neither are we.